All right, folks. Good evening. This is Omar Serrano with the Tilted Lawyer Podcast. So we're taking a break from some of our normal coverage that we've been talking about. We've been talking about Blake Lively now for long enough. But there's been a case that's been brought to my attention, and it's not going to get. It hasn't been getting the kind of coverage that it deserves, and I wanted to shed some light on it as best that I could. It may or may not get as many views as we're accustomed to over here on the Tilted Lawyer Podcast, but that's okay because a 14-year-old girl vanishes from a group home in Arizona. Weeks later, her remains are found, dismembered, discarded along a desolate highway. Her name was Emily Pike. She was a daughter, she was a friend, she was a young Indigenous girl whose story, like so many before hers, was almost lost in the noise. There's been significant uprising trying to get her name remembered, trying to get her story told. And so I'm doing my best to try to tell that story. Tonight we're telling her story, and we're going to examine the crisis that's been talked about for years, that I kind of shed a little bit of light on a couple of weeks ago when we covered the Gabby Petito case. But why is it that there is such this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in this country that so often goes unreported and ignored? It's an epidemic. It's been ignored for too long. Why do some cases like Gabby Petito's, like Natalie Hallway's, become these national obsessions? Well, Indigenous victims, or really just women of color, victims like Emily, barely end up as a blip on the radar. What systemic failures allows these crimes to persist? What can be done? This is the Tilted Lawyer Podcast. Let's get into it.
Whatever you might be going through and wherever you might be, this is Omar Serrano with the Tilted Lawyer Podcast. I'm here to take your mind off of things. Yes, I'm an attorney. No, I'm not giving you legal advice. We're going to sit and talk like people, as these are the candid thoughts of one practicing attorney, and it's after hours. So have a seat. Feel free to have a drink and join me. Let's get started.
All right, folks. No matter who shows up in chat, we're talking about this case today. I see Enola Ucidi in the chat. I think I remember how to pronounce her name. Trimbath is in there. Angel's in here. Look, this is a case. Let's get into the timeline of events. So January 27th of 2025, a 14-year-old Emily Pike. She's a San Carlos Apache girl, last seen walking away from her group home near Mesa Drive and McKellips Road in Mesa, Arizona. The group home reports her missing that day, and Mesa police enter her as a missing runaway juvenile in the national database by that evening, and that was about it. Emily's mom later said that she wasn't informed of the disappearance until about a week later, which raised all kinds of questions to me. I literally just learned about this case this afternoon. It's been a busy week for me. I've had trials, I've had stuff, I've had a tremendous amount of things to do. This has been a case that has been hinted to me for a couple of weeks now. This is the first time I've been able to dive into it, but this is what we know so far. Mid-February of 2025, after 2 weeks with no sign of Emily, they make a gruesome discovery on Valentine's Day. Hikers found trash bags containing human remains near milepost 277 along U.S. Highway 60, was about 19 miles north of Globe in rural Gila County. Authorities obviously suspect foul play. They launch an investigation, but they do not immediately release the details to the public, which begs a lot of questions. Law enforcement wise, what is the strategy there? You have a girl that's been chopped up and discarded along the highway, contained in trash bags. What would be the advantage to not publicizing a story like that? I gotta wonder. Late February of 2025 is about 2 weeks. The remains are identified or unidentified. Investigators, they hold off on public announcements while they're working to confirm the victim's identity. But some information gets leaked on social media via law enforcement memo, revealing the horrifying condition where they found Pike's body at varying stages of decomposition. Leaked details indicated that the victim had been dismembered. The head and torso were found in the bags, while the arms and hands were still missing. And this is the article that leaked that information. I had this all. Let me share this with you guys. This was the article. This is how it gets leaked. The killing of 14-year-old Arizona girl is reverberating through indigenous communities nationwide, including in Indiana, where local funeral directors demanding justice. As Crime Online previously reported, Emily Pike, a member of the San Carlos Apache Tribe, was reported missing in late January. She was last seen walking near Phoenix before investigators found most of her remains, but some have yet to be recovered. Pike was in a group home when she vanished from the Mesa area. Her former roommate told the media that Pike had a history of running away, that she vanished after wanting to be with a boy she met while taking guitar lessons. Oh boy. Information regarding Pike's death leaks to the public late last month via a memo from Gila County Police and social media. The memo indicates that Pike's head and torso were found in bags. Her arms and hands reportedly still missing. Autopsy indicates she suffered facial and head trauma. That is one of the big focuses of the investigation, is what happened between the end of January and then February 14th when she was discovered. Gila police are handling the case and treating it as a homicide. No shit. And that is little Emily right there. Just a little girl, man. Just a kid. 14 years old. Just started getting interested in boys. Guitar lessons. Living in a group home. Mom doesn't discover about the fact that she's missing for a week. Her 14 years on planet Earth, well, they didn't go the smoothest. But she didn't deserve to have this happen to her in the manner that it was. And then to have her story just basically discarded. It wasn't until the end of February that the Gila County Sheriff's Office confirms the identity of Emily. They confirmed the identity of the remains as Emily Pike. On February 27th, they notify her family. And then in a public statement shortly thereafter, they announced that the unidentified female found on Valentine's Day was indeed 14-year-old Emily Pike, member of the San Carlos Apache Tribe, who had been reported missing from Arizona. So early March of 2025, news begins to spread. This story begins to take hold on various social media outlets, such as TikTok and YouTube and other places. I haven't seen a whole lot of coverage whatsoever about this case anywhere really on YouTube. I think Grizzlies, True Crime Grizzlies might have covered it, if I recall. There's outrage. There's people that are trying to spark outrage. There's people that are trying to get this story out into the zeitgeist to draw some attention into what has been, this isn't nothing new. Indigenous girls going missing, women of color going missing, women going missing in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods going missing. Yeah, you know why that happens? Because it's pretty common knowledge that when a woman goes missing in an environment like that, or if they happen to maintain a little bit of color on their skin, then the chances of a full-blown investigation, a nationwide search, nationwide interest is pretty much slim to none, and that's held true. That's held true. Think of the most famous stories of missing women that you've come to know over the last few decades. And if you go into the recesses of your mind, I'm willing to venture a guess that they all share a similar profile. This was just a little Indian girl discarded on the side of the road. The killer must have thought it was not that big of a deal. He didn't really go through that much trouble to hide the remains, did he? On March 5th and 6th, candlelight vigils are held in Mesa near her group home, drawing hundreds of people dressed in red, which was a color symbolizing the missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement, otherwise known as MMIW. Community members and family spoke about Emily's life and the broader epidemic of violence against Indigenous women. Red handprint imagery, hashtags like No More Stolen Sisters, Justice for Emily were shared widely on social media. There was another vigil on the San Carlos Apache Reservation scheduled for March 15th to honor her memory. By the second week of March, which is where we're wrapping up the second week of March, Gila County authorities, with the assistance from the FBI, Bureau of Indian Affairs, continue to investigate. There haven't been any arrests made. Information as to suspects, I'll get into that. But there was a day of action rally that was held on March 10th by multiple groups to demand justice for Emily and other missing or murdered Indigenous women. There are official reports that they are receiving tips and they're getting leads around the clock, but no suspects of note as of this far. So there's multiple law enforcement agencies right now that are involved in the investigation due to the circumstances of Emily's case. The Gila County Sheriff's Office is leading the homicide investigation, coordinating with the Mesa Police and the FBI. Mesa Police are involved simply because she went missing in Mesa, so they're helping. The BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, is involved, and the San Carlos Apache Tribal Police obviously are involved. This is a multi-jurisdictional effort that reflects that this is a complex investigation. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what kind of leads they have, but the fact that they have so many different jurisdictions aiding in the investigation tells me that there's more to this case than meets the eye. It's really difficult to investigate cases of missing Indigenous persons who go missing off reservations, but are later found on tribal or rural land. It's difficult. Historically, it has been an avenue to dispose of people without repercussion, just historically, just on average. These killings have been going on for decades. I mean, if you really want to get down into it, let's just go back into the 1800s. And the warring that used to take place between Native American peoples and the coming settlers, and how they treated Indigenous people in the folds at the very outset, the very beginning, just post-Civil War. This is nothing new. I mean, we're bringing light to it now. We're talking about it now. But even now, I mean, what is the spotlight here that is being shined on this issue? I'm not even sure, even though I might be aware, I'm not even sure that I know the depths of how many people go missing in these Indigenous communities. But I'll tell you what, I got some statistics, and I'm going to talk a lot about that a little bit later in the show. But first, as to potential suspects, investigators, they do have some leads. There's no positive suspects yet, at least that they're mentioning in public. In fact, in Gila County, officials have debunked rumors circulating on social media that claim that there were multiple suspects who were involved, calling those claims unfounded. This was from an article taken from ABC 15. I'm going to share this with you. They shed some light on the investigation. Let me just get that to you guys right now. Here we go. This is what they say. Multiple communities are hurting and pushing for answers after the death of 14-year-old Emily Pike. Mesa Police Department officials confirm the teen was living in a group home when she was reported missing. Pike was last seen in January near Mesa Drive and McKellis Road. Weeks later on Valentine's Day, her body was found dismembered on U.S. northeast of Globe. The homicide investigation. The sheriff's office, they received a call from some people that were actually out in the area. And during their course of walking down the trail, discovered the trash bags that when they kind of investigated it, they believed that there was possibly a body in one of the bags. The sheriff's office said that the discovery is what sparked their investigation. Pike was found on February 14th, but she wasn't identified until February 27th. ABC 15 asked GCSO if there was any persons of interest so far. And they say at this point, we don't have any positive interest. Our detectives here have been in contact with members of the Mesa Police Department since that is where she was last at. They've also been in contact with the FBI, the BIA, and others. In other words, there's nothing, if they know something, they're not disclosing it as of yet. So the nature of the crime involving dismemberment, disposal of remains in a remote area. It was what do you say about that, man? Are we looking at a serial killer? Are we looking at, look, when you have a case that involves dismemberment, the disposal of remains, I mean, there's two areas that you go to. You go to perhaps it was like a cartel incident, or perhaps it was a serial killer or some kind of sadistic person. Who knows? It would not have been a crime of passion. It would not have been, presumably, you never know. She could have met a boy. She got lured into this area, and then, he has other ideas, and then she meets her untimely demise. But the brutal nature of the crime is a clue in of itself. Emily's fingerprints were not recovered. That could have been an attempt to impede identification. Investigators have also noted that the location where her remains were found is probably not the murder scene, meaning she might have been killed elsewhere, obviously. It's not that hard to deduce if you're placing body parts into plastic bags and discarding them on the road, that perhaps the killing took place elsewhere. At this stage, analysts and police have refrained from speculating publicly about what they know and so on and so forth. I wanted to share some statistics with you. There's not a whole lot more information that we know. We know that this is a situation. It is a case. The details are gory. The information out there is few. The outcry and the desire to know about this little girl is not very big. Hence, there's not that very many of you in chat right now. There's not that many of you watching this stream right now. Compared to the other stuff that I do, like, for example, about Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, celebrity cases, some of the other high-profile cases where we get like hundreds of viewers at a time. There's literally like 20 of you right now watching this stream. And we're covering it specifically because there's not much attention on this case, and I wanted to get the story out there as best I can. These are some statistics. High rates in murder and disappearance in the United States. I'm going to share this with you guys. In the United States, thousands of Indigenous women go missing or are killed with alarming frequency. According to the National Crime Information Center, there were 5,712 reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls in 2016 alone. But the Department of Justice's public database only logged 116 of those cases. 116 out of 5,712 reports of missing girls from American Indian and Alaskan Native women. What percentage is that? That's not even 1%. What is that? I'm going to do the math. It is, 116 divided by 5712. That is literally 0.02%. Wow. The BIA estimates that approximately 4,200 Indigenous missing or murdered cases remain unsolved across the country. These unsolved cases often result from the lack of investigative resources, poor coordination among agencies, violence in Indigenous communities. What's the statistics there? The statistics dictate that Indigenous women suffer extraordinarily high rates of violence in general. I'm not talking about women of color in general. I'm talking about specifically Indigenous women. The National Institute of Justice study found that there are 84% of American Indian and Alaska Native women that have experienced violence in their lifetime. That is extraordinarily high. 84%. That means, think back to all of you. I know that a good number of you who watch this show, who subscribe to the show, have yourselves been involved in domestic violence, but it's not nearly 84%. There's, I don't know what the numbers are, but most people don't experience violence in their lives to that degree. Domestic violence, getting beaten up by a partner, yelled at, mental anguish, that's one thing. Actual physical violence is quite another, where you're actually injured, where you're beaten up, where your life is in peril because of some stupid asshole thinks that it's appropriate to put his hands on you. And guess what? To what would be the consequences when there's 5,712 reported missing cases of these women, only 116 that get logged in the Department of Justice's public database? That is an embarrassingly small number. To what do we owe that statistic? 84% of Indigenous women having experienced violence in their lifetime, with 56% having been subjected to sexual violence, like they're animals. Homicide, not cancer, not obesity, not car accidents. Homicide is a leading cause of death for these women. For non-Hispanic Native females in the U.S., homicide was among the top 10 causes of death for ages 1 through 45 as of 2020. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported that in 2020, American Indian, Alaska Native females had the second highest homicide rate of any racial ethnic group in the country. Gabby Petito's stepdad remarked about these numbers. I don't know about these numbers specifically. One of the questions that was posed to him was, what do you think about the disparity in Indigenous women being reported missing as opposed to basically white women, is what he was asked. And he says, yeah, at first I was pretty offended, but then I started looking at the numbers and I was like, what the fuck? There's a real problem there. And what to do about it? I don't know. Oh, Miss you, CD. I have so much respect for you just for covering her. She deserves that. Natives don't get the coverage. CD, I appreciate you greatly. Thank you so much for the 5. And yeah, look, I knew that this was not going to be a very high view story, but I wanted to put it out there into the YouTube stratosphere for whatever good it might do in trying to extend her story. There's a very good friend of mine that brought this case to my attention. I wanted to cover it, and so here I am. Numbers be damned. And also, you can only talk about Blake Lively for so long, man. Jesus. Oh, there's a Lauren raid coming. I can already see the bacon emojis. Let me get back into some of these statistics. Yeah, so the Petito case. I covered the Petito case. I was invested in that case. I had a great deal of sympathy just 2 weeks ago. I recovered it in light of the new documentary, the Netflix documentary that came out about her, where they introduced some new evidence. And, you know, at the time, I think it was like in 2020 when the news broke, there were some news outlets that were trying to take in the Gabby Petito story. And then they would annoyingly, yeah, but what about all the indigenous women that go missing? And at first it's like, look, this young lady, Gabby Petito, was a young woman, burgeoning young woman on the cusp of becoming a woman. And, you know, she finds herself in this situation, victim of domestic violence, loses her life at the hands of her boyfriend. She deserves all the attention that she got. Certainly she does. And so it was a minor annoyance that some would have the audacity to, some would argue, use that as a political opportunity to raise awareness for others. But when you really look at the numbers, holy shit. Could I just run that number by you again? 5,712 reports of missing indigenous women, only 116 of which is less than a fifth of 1%, are logged in the Department of Justice's public database. And how's this number grab you? 84% of indigenous women, and by indigenous, they're talking about American Indian and Native Alaskan women, 84% have experienced violence in their lifetime. 56% of those have experienced sexual violence. I don't know how many of you have experienced those kinds of atrocities in your life, but I've been an attorney for 11 years now, and I can tell you on good authority that of the women that have genuinely been victimized in such a matter, of the people that actually make it into my office. Now, look, think about what making it into my office means. It means that you're probably desperate. It means, you know, and I'm a family law attorney mostly. I have been involved in criminal cases involving sexual assault, involving crimes of violence. It's a completely different thing. If you're not a prosecutor, then most of the time you're defending against those charges. And doing that really does something to you, because you start to realize that, holy shit, of these alleged crimes, how many of these crimes are actually bullshit? Like, how many of these women actually lied about what happened to them because of some secondhand embarrassment, because they're trying to get the upper hand in a custody battle, because they're trying to get somebody out of the house and sell it out from underneath the guy? It happens embarrassingly frequently for family law reasons. And I've tracked in my mind that there is a stark contrast to women that have been legitimately victimized to those that are just telling stories. I've gotten pretty good at it. I got a pretty good bullshit detector. The woman that has genuinely been subjected to violence and violent sexual assaults is trapped in that incident, and she's very much tied down with her words. She could remember scant pieces here or there. She could remember some details, but not a lot. It frustrates the prosecutors because they cannot afford to allow an inconsistent statement. I've seen children that will tell bits and pieces, and it's fascinating. They could all experience the exact same thing, but different aspects of the same incident will stick out for them. Like, for example, there's one case where there was a sexual assault involving three young girls. At the time, they would have been like 10, 12, and 13. They all remember watching the same movie. The movie was Titanic. But they all spatially remember the room different. They all spatially remember different features about the perpetrator. They all spatially or physically remember different smells. They remember different commercials. They remember different parts of the movie. They remember, and after the incident, they vaguely remember discussing it amongst themselves, and some just can't remember anything altogether because they have legitimately just blocked it out. And if you've ever been a victim of trauma and had the opportunity to sit in a therapy session to try to go into the farther recesses of your minds to uncover the various atrocities that have been done to you and the varying assaults and violence and bad shit that has happened to you in your life, chances are that you're not going to be able to remember it all. Our brains are really effing good at coping. And a coping mechanism for our brains psychologically is that we block out really bad shit. Because how else? How else? One of the responses to repeated violence that I see in young children, that I see repeated in women, is they shut down. They shut down. As soon as you start yelling, as soon as they start getting yelled at, their shoulders drop, their head drops, and they almost grow catatonic. They're just trying to not do anything to provoke, not say anything to provoke. They're doing anything in their power to just try to get out of their safe. Their minds, their brains, it literally just shuts down. If you're a grown woman, you revert to like when you were 10 or 8 or 6, a scared little girl sitting cornered in her bedroom by some grown individual, heaping amounts of abuse at you. It is a striking thing. And then there's cases where, oh, well, I can tell you in exact detail, this is what happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. The whole thing, because they fucking made it up. That's why. Can I say that to any degree of certainty that that's how it is every time? No, I can't. Because everybody's brain is different and people process things differently. I'm just saying that it is a marker that oftentimes these victims of violence cannot remember their story with any degree of certainty that a prosecutor can rely on, which is why it is so important to gather physical evidence. It's why it's so important that they instruct law enforcement, look, I can't operate on your assumptions. I can't operate on what she's saying. I need evidence. The investigation is never over. It's one of the moral conundrums to being a lawyer. How the fuck do you know who's telling the truth, man? You better hone in on your spidey senses. The reality of it is that you're going to be defending some people that may or may not have committed horrible crimes. You've got to use your better judgment to decide who's guilty and innocent. There is a good chance that you will prosecute people, and you better have your spidey senses on point, lest you be guilty of trying an innocent man to prosecution who might actually be innocent because you couldn't decipher between what was real and what was fake. Is that too much to ask? Of course it is. But somebody's got to do the job, and you only got so many trials in you as a lawyer. Seriously, it's every time you're in a jury trial, it takes a measure out of your soul and takes it away forever. And you either lose your resolve to continue to do it further, or you go the other way and you lose a piece of your humanity to the point where at some point, some of these attorneys turn into straight out sociopaths. They have no empathy. There's no room for empathy anymore. There's no room for humanity. It's all about the facts and the evidence and what they could win in court. It happens. I apologize for my rants. There are some Canadian statistics because Indigenous women don't just live in North America, or I should say the United States. This crisis is similarly severe in Canada. Indigenous women make up only about 4% of Canada's female population. Keep that in mind. If there is 1,000 people, that means that there is 40 of them. But they represent 16% of all female homicide victims between 1980 and 2014. 16%. How the fuck is that even mathematically possible? I'm not that great at math. I just know that 4% of the entire population makes up 16% of all female homicide victims between 1980 and 2014. What in the F? They're also overrepresented among missing women. 11% of missing women in Canada are Indigenous. The homicide rate for Indigenous women in Canada is multiple times higher than for non-Indigenous women. For example, in 2014, it was nearly 6 times higher, 3.64 per 100,000 population for Indigenous women, versus 0.65 per 100,000 for non-Indigenous. Do you know how great that disparity is? I mean, it's 6 times, but fuck. I'll get to where I'm going with this in a minute. Between 2001 and 2014, regions like the Canadian Prairies and the Northern Territories saw Indigenous female homicide rates more than 10 times greater than those of non-Indigenous females. All right, so what is the obvious takeaway? The obvious takeaway. What is the obvious takeaway? I'm not counting all women of color into this, although perhaps I should have. I'm focusing on, and perhaps on another stream, maybe next week, but I'm focusing on Indigenous women in this one because of Emily Pike. What is the takeaway? Why are these statistics so askew? And the reason is obvious. Because law enforcement, because the government, because our communities view Indigenous women as disposable. Lab rats. Let's just be real. If you, how many times have you heard serial killers going out on the prowl? And they're trying to get their sea legs underneath them because they're trying to hone their skills. Who do they practice on? Prostitutes in bad areas, in bad neighborhoods, in Compton, in Boyle Heights, in whatever area you want to say, Pomona, California. They do that because they know that the law enforcement response is not going to be very good. The chances of them being investigated is extremely small. What is one more dead prostitute amongst the masses? It's nothing for them. Disposable. Lab rats. It suggests to me that people in these Indigenous communities where people are on these reservations are seen similarly by those on the outside for sure, but probably also from those on the inside. How could it be the case that 84% of women experience violence at some point in their life if they were not more greatly respected by the people inside of those communities, by the men inside of those communities? I'm not disillusioned to try to pretend that men aren't responsible for the majority of those cases of violence. That's just how it is. I've been alive too long. I've been doing this job for way too long. There's a lack of respect for the Indigenous people amongst the outsiders and for those on the inside. If the insiders don't respect their women enough to not violate them, that's a problem. And it speaks to a greater socioeconomic study, which is what happens to communities that are shit on by the government over the years. Well, they start losing not just respect from the outside, they start losing respect for themselves. Crimes in these impoverished areas or in these isolated areas is rampant amongst themselves for so many different reasons. And I'm not going to pretend to know all the reasons. I remember myself living in a neighborhood like that. I never got in so many fistfights as when I lived in a community like that. Just no self-esteem, no respect for themselves, no respect for each other. Just everybody is on edge. Everybody's on edge. And I don't pretend to know what all they are going through, but there are so many different stories. But 84% is just unacceptable. 56% being crimes of sexual violence. What in the fuck? There is a persistent problem. And the one constant in all of this is the lack of comprehensive data. Why is there a lack of comprehensive data? Many cases are just not properly documented because of misclassification of the victim's race, simply falling through bureaucratic cracks because, fuck it. Ain't nobody coming to identify this one. We're just going to let that one go. Indigenous women are sometimes recorded as white, Hispanic, Asian in crime databases, obscuring the true scale of maybe the actual numbers. The numbers I'm reporting is just what's being reported. It's not by any means the comprehensive scope of what's going on. Add on to that, families often report that missing Indigenous loved ones are labeled as runaways, given low priority. Hey, she's missing. She'll turn up. Just another runaway, right? Emily Pike, she'll turn up. She's just another runaway. She'll come back. She's just going through something. Gabby Petito was missing for like a couple of days or a few days, and all of a sudden it's like national headlines. Emily Pike goes missing. Her mom doesn't even know about it for a week. They immediately classify her as a runaway. What does runaway presuppose? That there is not a suspect to be found, that she did this of her own accord. So therefore, if you're a law enforcement, let's just say that you're a rookie. Let's just say that you're your first day. And they say, hey, we're classifying this person as a runaway. Well, you're going to have a very different response to that than somebody that has been classified as kidnapped or missing. Missing because of runaway, missing because of abduction. Two completely different responses, aren't they? It's too easy to just, fuck it, she'll come back. Run away. Done. Runaways are not given media attention. Runaways do not spark national searches for individuals. They don't. The media needs the salaciousness. Runaway teen is not salacious enough, nor will it ever be. Excuse me, folks. Let me just check something real quick. Of course. All right. What's up, Redondo? I hope you're feeling better, by the way. Redondo says, thank you for the 5. Says, I grew up in North Dakota. It's a real problem on the reservation because they won't allow cooperation as a lot of time. Yeah, 100%. I know what you mean. Access to law enforcement, access to law help, attorneys, self-help centers. They're so just tightly wound in. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to get them the help they need because of the way that the communities are structured. 100%. And thank you so much for the 5, Redondo. And with another 5 coming in clutch. That's why I will never forgive myself for not calling 911. Redondo, I know about your story individually, and you got to stop beating yourself up for that. You just have to. You were a victim of a lot of things. But you calling 911 was not responsible for any of that. You need to know that. And I hope you're feeling better. I really do. Miss Ucidi says, I'm native. There are so many people in Oklahoma missing. I'm just happy you're here. Miss Ucidi, I'm thrilled to have you here as well. Redondo with the 5 again. Cops didn't give 2 shits about me. No way they care about them. Cops didn't give 2 shits about me. Oh, repeated. I wonder how it must feel to know that you've gone through these terrible things, that you've gone through this extreme, violent episode where you were victimized and perhaps physically harmed, and to have law enforcement just decide that they're not going to arrest the person because, well, she was out of hand. That was Gabby Petito's story, right? And I talked a lot about that. I was like, oh, he's got marks on his face, so this one must have gone out of hand. You know what, Miss Petito, why don't you go home and take a shower? It's basically what they told her. Dragonfly says, the indigenous I knew were so gentle, forgiving, patient, and wise. They adapted to life with a stoicism that I admire so deeply. I've also seen, because I work in family law, I see these indigenous women coming into court from reservations. And the levels of isolation with some of these children is just so appalling. Like these children are just, and this young lady, Miss Pike, was in a group home. I see some of these children that are growing up in these group homes, and they walk into court just looking for somebody to take charge of them, to adopt them. Their parents are unfit. Their parents oftentimes have lost their parental rights, and there's not really many feasible family members that could take them on. So they end up in these group homes. And they change group homes like all the time. They're uneducated. They're under cared for. They're unloved. They're zombies. They're robots. They lack confidence. They look scared half the time. And there's not much you could do for them. There's not much anybody's willing to do for them. And the court's like, okay, so who is here ready to step up and take this child? Okay, so dad is a drug addict. Mom is the same or accused of abuse and neglect or whatever. Okay, what about the next in line? Where are the grandparents? Where are the aunts and uncles? Where are the cousins? Is there any family member that is in a position to take on this child? No. Fuck. Then I guess we'll just wait for some foster parent or something, somebody to adopt this child. These kids are like 12, 13 years old. Do you know how dangerous it is to bring a 12 or 13-year-old into your home? You never know what kind of traumas these children have been through. It takes a special kind of person to be able to deal with that. And knowing the dangers, there's not many that are willing to step up in that regard. There's a point in time where I endeavor to take some children into my home at some point when my daughters are older. But there's a lot to consider when you're thinking about doing something like that, taking in a 12 or a 13-year-old into your home to raise. And look, there's a lot of beautiful stories. There's a lot of ugly stories out there too. It's just so dangerous. It's so dangerous. I feel for the children. I feel for, I don't know. I feel for the parents in some regards. I mean, they're going through stuff themselves. Because who are these parents? 10 years ago, these parents were in themselves in these group homes. They were themselves probably victimized. They were themselves subjected to horrific amounts of parental neglect, trying to find somebody to love them in life. And now they're doing it to their children. It's hard. It's easy to vilify them and demonize them because of what they're putting these children through. But you also have to understand that there is an apex to all of that. There was a place where it all started. And, you know, the way that these cases are, when's the last time that you heard of the socioeconomics or the sociology of some of these indigenous communities? You don't. You don't, because they don't have to. Because the way the government has it set up is like, look, you guys govern yourselves. And we're not going to help you as much, and lots of luck with that. They get benefits. Yeah, sure, benefits, but Jesus Christ, are they in danger? Let me continue with some of this. The Urban Indian Health Institute in 2018 identified 506 cases of MMIWG in just 71 U.S. cities, but noted that law enforcement data was often inconsistent. Some cities had no data at all on indigenous missing women, despite known cases. In short, the available numbers severely underestimate the real scope of the crisis due to underreporting and data gaps. Let's talk about some specific cases. I don't know how many of you guys heard about it, but there was this young girl, Tina Fontaine from Canada. She was a 15-year-old First Nations girl from Manitoba, Canada. In August of 2014, her body was found wrapped in plastic and a duvet cover in the Red River in Winnipeg. She was in foster care, was briefly missing, ruled missing before her murder. Tina's death and the subsequent acquittal of the man accused in her killing outrages the community public. How in the F? It becomes a catalyst for change, triggering national outrage and, renewed calls by activists and protests and all these kinds of stuff into missing and murdered Indigenous women. To what effect? I'm not sure. I feel like I just don't know how effective these protests are. Yeah, you show up with your picket signs and stuff, and you march onto the U.S. Capitol steps, and you get on camera, and then what? And then everybody goes home. It's like these town hall meetings. It's like, hey, why don't we just stop doing town hall meetings? Oh, that's a great idea. I didn't realize that was an option. And then the town hall meetings turn into these picket sign protests that nobody gives a shit about. It makes for a good story for about 30 seconds, and then people just kind of move on. Public pressure following Tina's murder was one factor that led to the establishment of Canada's National Inquiry into MMIWG in 2016. Her story launches grassroots initiatives like the Bear Clan Patrol and Drag the Red, a group of teams who periodically comb waterways for signs of missing persons. They show, just those two groups. There was the case of Savannah LaFontaine Graywind in the U.S. She was a 22-year-old Indigenous woman, a Spirit Lake, Dakota woman from North Dakota. She was 8 months pregnant when she disappeared in 2017. She was found murdered. Her baby was cut from her womb. And they reported on the brutality of the crime and her status as an expectant mom. It got national headlines. And it did inspire something called the Savannah's Act, which is a U.S. federal law that went into practice in 2020 to improve the response to missing and murdered Indigenous people. To what effect? I don't know. But it's supposed to mandate better data collection, reporting, communication between tribal, federal, local law enforcement in such cases. Has it had an effect? I have no idea. It was supposed to be a bipartisan effort, acknowledging that there are systemic changes that are needed to prevent tragedies like this and to fix the issue of underreporting for Indigenous women, such as Savannah LaFontaine. There was a Highway of Tears case in Canada that refers to a remote stretch of Highway 16 in northern British Columbia, Canada, where numerous women, a majority of them Indigenous, have disappeared or been found murdered since the 1970s. There's some estimates that dozens of Indigenous women and girls, like maybe 80 or more or so, have fallen victim along this corridor. Cases span decades. They remain unsolved. Poverty, lack of transportation, likely forced many Indigenous women into the area to hitchhike, obviously making them vulnerable to predators. The term itself, a Highway of Tears, was coined in 1998 during a vigil. It's become emblematic of the indifference and racism that allows these crimes to go unchecked for so long. There's the story of Ashley Loring, a heavy runner in the U.S. She was a 20-year-old member of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana. She went missing in June of 2017 from a reservation. Her family searched tirelessly. They even conducted their own searches across rugged terrain in Montana. Her case drew attention to how Indigenous families often have to investigate these cases themselves because of slow, inadequate, or non-existent law enforcement responses. Years later, she's still missing. But her story fueled the idea for advocacy in Montana, which has one of the highest rates of missing Native women in the country. In 2019, the state of Montana, they passed a law known as Hannah's Act, named after another Indigenous woman, Hannah Harris, to improve how state authorities handle missing person cases and to appoint a specialist to oversee such cases. And then, I touched on it before, but Gabby Petito, for whatever reason, sparked this renewed interest into this very topic. Obviously, it's not an Indigenous case. Obviously, it's not. But there was a lot of outrage in the Indigenous community and people that support them about why Gabby Petito's case was so highly publicized. And look, I'm not taking anything away from Gabby Petito. I covered that story myself. I did multiple videos on it going all the way back to 2022. She deserves every bit of acclaim and attention that she got. But in the course of that, it's like, hey, so what's the deal? What is the deal for discussing disparities in media attention? This 22-year-old white woman goes missing on a trip in Wyoming. It dominates national news for weeks. It's immediately reported on. I mean, it was all over the place. True crimes, podcasts. I mean, name your true crime YouTuber of choice. Chances are they covered it. I don't remember who I was listening to back then. Probably like, gosh, I can't even think of it right now. But I just remember I was enamored is the wrong word. I was fascinated by that case, namely because it involved this young couple, this young man, this young woman, and they're embarking on this weeks-long trip by themselves, just a trip across the country, cooped up in this little vehicle. And like there are these young people. It's like, wow, that is a really bad idea. Turns out the guy had a history of mental illness. I don't remember if it was diagnosed or not, but he had issues, and her life was cut short at the hands of one Brian Laundrie. And it was this national fascination. All the pictures, I think probably because if you could paint the picture of a stereotypical person that the media would become enamored with, Gabby Petito would fit every variable. She was a young, blonde, attractive white woman that people instantly fell in love with, that the media fell in love with. It's unfair to attack the family the way that they were attacked because there is the existence of this non-reporting that happens with Indigenous communities. And they've acknowledged that this is an issue. And I respect them a great deal for that. But her case, for whatever reason, just sparks this national discussion about what the fuck? I don't understand. How does this story make all the national headlines and not so many others? In stark contrast to Gabby Petito, at least 710 Indigenous people, mostly female, mostly very young, were reported missing in Wyoming from 2011 until 2020, with comparatively little media coverage or outside help. There was a state report that found that Indigenous missing persons in Wyoming were often overlooked. Hundreds of cases of Indigenous people reported missing in the exact same state over the past decade have not been met with the same furor as Petito's case. No shit. This was from the Business Insider. I'm going to share this article with you guys. This was kind of indicative of what happened when the Petito coverage was going on. Is that on the screen? Oh, I am not paying for this shit. No, never mind. I'm not going to read it anymore. Well, I pay for it on my other thing. I'm not paying for it on this one. The gist of that story was that hundreds of Indigenous people go missing and they're unreported and all kinds of stuff. But they did give this example about what they coined to what Native advocates have coined as missing white woman syndrome. The tendency of the media and the public to fixate on missing cases involving young white women, while ignoring women or victims of color, particularly Indigenous women. It highlighted that there are two similar tragedies that can receive vastly different responses depending on the race of the victim. Now, as upset as I was, because, like I said, in the moment when I was learning about the Petito case, I was like, how dare these people take this moment of this girl's story to make a political point? But then I started going back and just trying to remember, when is the last time I could remember a woman of color grabbing national headlines the way that Natalie Holloway and Gabby Petito did? Those cases are approximately 16, 17 years apart. Those are the two that stick out of my mind. I cannot think of a single woman of color that captured the nation's attention the way that those two cases did. I can't. What is that? What do you attribute to that? I have theories. My theories mean nothing. Each of these cases, and sadly, countless others, they could be listed. They could be listed has contributed to greater public awareness. There's common threads. There's patterns in indifference, slow response. I'm talking about this like this is something that this is nothing new. I mean, Jesus Christ. The Watts riots in LA in the 60s, the LA riots in the early 90s, 91, 92, at the acquittal of Rodney King. There is deep sentiments of anger in these impoverished communities. And guess what? It's harder to police those communities because of income levels, because of, whatever you want to say. But crime rates are high. Law response is low. And if you are a young person growing up in that area and you happen to be the victim of one of the products of these underrepresented communities with varying levels of law enforcement help, then, hey, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. If you're lucky enough to get help and get up out of there, then great. If not, then, hey, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make something of yourself. Elon Musk did it. There's been a historical trauma and marginalization of the indigenous community. There's a legacy of colonization that has directly led to the vulnerabilities that we see today in these communities. Indigenous communities in the US and in Canada have faced centuries of violent displacement, forced assimilation, such as through Indian boarding schools in the US, residential schools in Canada. I don't know how many of you guys watched that show, 1923. That is kind of a really good example of the kind of stuff that was going on back then. Systemic poverty. All of these things have served to erode social structures and subjected generations upon generation of young children to severe amounts of trauma. I don't know how to fix it. There's this lady, Mary Kim Titla. She's an Apache activist. She noted that this crisis stems from colonization and forced removal, which marginalized indigenous people by erasing their culture and identity. Where have you heard that from before? Something about slave ships, the removal of a certain group of folks from Africa to be enslaved in America, stripped of their culture, stripped of their identity, stripped of their name, given the names of slave owners. It turns out that dynamic is not limited to African Americans. It has played out across varying people of color for hundreds and hundreds of years. And in 2025, it is no different. The resulting, she says, intergenerational trauma manifests in issues like substance abuse, mental health struggles, family violence, which can increase Indigenous women's exposure to harm both inside and outside their communities. And so, look, it is a tremendous issue. Yeah, talked about that. Talked about all this stuff. Emily Pike, What are the odds that we're going to capture her killer? I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that we ain't. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that we ain't. And if we should so happen to be lucky enough to even get a suspect in this case, I mean, you know, I'll report it. But look, Emily Pike deserves to have her story told. She was a young 14-year-old girl, a young 14-year-old girl. Imagine yourself when you were 14 years old and you're just starting to have crushes on boys where it's like meaningful because, you know, high school and stuff. And I don't know what her experience education-wise was in these group homes. Imagine the severe trauma that she was probably put through in her 14 years. Her mom unable to care for her on her own, placed in a group home, looking for somebody to love her. She follows some young boy. They think that she's with some young boy. She's trying to take guitar lessons or whatever, and she ends up chopped up and discarded on the side of the road. Her identity was not that. That's the end of her story. It wasn't her entire story. She was just a little girl, and she deserves to be put in the spotlight. She deserves more attention, and she deserves a sincere effort on the part of content creators worldwide to share and tell her story to the extent that we can. Look, this is a smallish YouTube channel. I don't know what ability I have to gain extra eyes on the story, but I'm sure going to try. If there's people that I could talk to that are invested in this case on future episodes, I'll 100% do it. 100%. I'll push it as far as I can because this story deserves attention, and that's just how it is. Folks, that's all I have for you for the Emily Pike stream for tonight. I will have some, I'll have some more content for you tomorrow. I'm debating about which case I'm going to cover. I have a couple of different shows in the works. I'm either going to do it tomorrow and the other on Friday or some combination of the two. I love you all. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, all 255 of you. You guys are amazing. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Stay safe out there, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.